Well, hello, people, and welcome to my first attempt at covering the news. And who am I? I'm just some guy that works for a living and cares about these things. Alright, so let's play a little game. We're going to take a look at this story about the Supreme Court taking on mail in ballots and what four different news sources has to say about it. We're going to go with Fox News, Democracy Now!, The Hill, and Slate. And we're going to see what these four outlets have to say about it. I'm going to take a look and see if any quotes are mentioned in one article or another and see whether or not any bits of information are missing out of one article or another. Let's start with Fox News. Start with the headline: RNC gets day at Supreme Court to challenge late arriving mail ballots. RNC lawsuit challenges Mississippi law allowing ballots postmarked by Election Day to count if received within 5 days. All right, seems fairly harmless. Let's take a look at Democracy Now! And their headline: Supreme Court considers challenge to Mississippi's mail-in ballot laws. No secondary line. Supreme Court to decide if mail-in ballots must arrive by Election Day. The Supreme Court just took a scary voting case that has Trump salivating. He might be disappointed. That one is a little more provocative. The rest of these seem fairly neutral, except for this does say in the Fox News one, late arriving. Late by who? Who says they're late? I guess that's what they're challenging, but that poisons the well just a little bit. Saying late arriving, it makes you think, oh, they're late. Why would they count them when they're late? They're not late. They're just when they arrive. They're postmarked on Election Day. This is far more neutral. Supreme Court considers challenge to Mississippi's mail-in ballot laws. The Hill, Supreme Court to decide if mail-in ballots must arrive by Election Day. That is also fairly neutral, but must arrive by Election Day seems to make sense to most people. So they don't. This headline doesn't necessarily give the impression that what if they're cast by Election Day. Maybe it should be Supreme Court to decide if mail-in ballots must be cast or arrive by Election Day. Or I would say if I were going less crazy than the Slate one, I would maybe go, but still kind of on the left side of things, I would maybe go Supreme Court to decide if mail-in ballots must be cast before Election Day. I think that would be a similarly slanted, although in the opposite direction, headline to this one. All right, let's move on from the headline. This is kind of nice. The secondary line: RNC lawsuit challenges Mississippi law allowing ballots postmarked by Election Day to count if received within 5 days. So there is a little clarification in this title, which actually I'm surprised by. Case will examine a state law in solid red Mississippi. So they do mention that it's a red state. Yeah, here it says the RNC, which has fought to stop late arriving ballots. They should say what they call late arriving ballots, but that's fine. So we got David Becker, Executive Director of the Center of Election Innovation and Research. Not sure what that really is, but he goes to say what this case is about is whether a ballot that was cast on or before Election Day, sealed in an envelope, placed in the U.S. mail, and received by a state some days later can be counted if a state law says that that's okay. So that's a fair assessment. They included this quote. This was a 2020 law, which was for COVID. So it says what the state argues, which is good. And he has, and they have this quote from Becker again, stating, "We as a society do not want a bunch of ballots coming in the day or two after, delivered late, not because of the voter, but because of the Postal Service, and having those ballots being the margin of victory in a close race." So they are giving the case against it, against cutting off mail-in ballots after Election Day. Allowing states to count large numbers of mail-in ballots that are received after Election Day undermines trust and confidence in our elections, Gruters said. RNC Chairman Joe Gruters. Elections must end on Election Day, which is why the RNC led the way in challenging this harmful state law. The RNC has been hard at work litigating this case for nearly 2 years, and we hope the Supreme Court will affirm the Fifth Circuit's landmark decision that mail-in ballots received after Election Day cannot be counted. All right, so Fox News actually did okay here. They included quotes from people on both sides. They did say what the state's arguments were, and I'll have to say, fairly factual there. Democracy Now! The Supreme Court has agreed to hear arguments in a case challenging Mississippi's counting of mail-in ballots received after Election Day. Under Mississippi's election law, ballot must be postmarked by Election Day and can arrive days later and still be counted. The Republican National Committee is challenging Mississippi's law. President Trump has rallied against mail-in ballots and blamed them for his loss in the 2020 election. Just the facts right there. Moving on to other articles. So there you have it with Democracy Now! Now we are moving on to, what is this? The Hill. So here we have the Joe Gruters quote. So it does say here, the Supreme Court battle pits the RNC against GOP officials in Mississippi. I didn't see that in the other article. A bit of information that was missing. Attorney General's office wrote the stakes are high. Ballots cast by but received after Election Day can swing close races and change the course of the country. That quote was not included in the Fox News one. Could await a case where the lower court answers the question presented incorrectly should one ever arise. I didn't see that quote in the other one either, but I didn't see Becker's quotes at all in here. So it just gave purely RNC versus GOP talking points on the Hill, which I thought was supposed to be a little more to the center versus Fox News anyway. Let's see what Slate has to say with this obviously biased headline here. But, I mean, you don't read Slate for subtlety. Session with mail-in ballots. So, factual backstory, but backstory nonetheless. They do give the actual statutes here. So here it gives some context about what Judge James Graves argued in his dissent. More context that the other one didn't have. Of course, this author is definitely trying to convince you, Richard L. Hassan, of their position. But, I mean, come on, so are the other ones. They just try to do a little more subtlety. All right, so it seems like this article is purely talking about why it's a Trump obsession and not a legitimate, even case. Talks about past stuff Trump went on rallying against mail-in ballots. Does talk about Judge James Graves' dissent, saying that, it's not the date that election officials receive ballots, it's when they're cast. And so just the plain face of laws. So in other words, this whole thing just takes a whole different angle to it. It doesn't give too many quotes about the for or against. It gives backstory more. So same story, completely different way about going about things. So the reason I went through this is just to show that you should look at multiple news sources when you're consuming news. Like, I like Slate and all, and everything in that article is factual, but it's purely an opinion piece. The other ones were a little more to the facts news, but they also had their biases. They also had their omissions. They do make decisions about what's included in those articles and what's not, what they want to highlight and what they don't. Slate wanted to tell the whole backstory. It was a legitimate angle to write the story from. These others wanted to pretend to be just the facts, but also kind of slanting your idea of what's going on to their side of things. So whether you're reading articles or watching news anchors, including me, we're all biased. Even the ones that try to look neutral. I mean, who would want to be neutral anyway? You should be objective. Slate, objectively factual. All the others are objectively factual. But through omission or inclusion, you're still showing your bias.